Hey guys, tonight we wander somewhere impossibly old. Before pyramids, before paper, before even the idea of yesterday was all that organized. You're standing ankle-deep in the slow, warm mud of southern Mesopotamia, where the Tigris and Euphrates rivers curl lazily through the land like two half-awake snakes. The air is soft and heavy, full of buzzing gnats, and the distant bleat of sheep who have absolutely no idea they're about to inspire humanity's first bookkeeping system. You're in Sumer, somewhere around 5000 BCE, and the world smells of wet clay, reed smoke, and barley mash. There are no clocks, no coins, and no concept of weekends, which may sound oddly peaceful until you remember the heat doesn't quit, and sandals haven't quite been perfected yet. You probably wouldn't last a day here. Sunburn, mosquito bites, and a complete lack of iced coffee would finish you off before lunchtime. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And while you're at it, let me know in the comments where you're listening from and what time it is there. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. The river in front of you doesn't rush. It glides. Mud banks slide past in gentle slowness, dotted with reeds taller than you are. Somewhere behind, a village clings to the edge of the floodplain, a patchwork of huts made of the very same clay you're standing on. The people here move with a kind of rhythm you haven't seen before. Sunrise, tend the animals, gather barley, sleep, then repeat. You see a man crouching, carving a narrow irrigation ditch with a bronze-tipped shovel that looks like it's seen better millennia. He's not working fast, he's working steady, and every so often he stops, squints towards the water level, then mutters something that sounds like a math problem with no words. He's trying to judge how many baskets of grain the coming flood will give him, and how many he'll owe the temple as tax. The trouble is, there's no official system for remembering those numbers yet. Historians still argue whether this place was truly the cradle of civilization, or just the world's earliest experiment in organized complaining. Either way, this stretch of river becomes a laboratory for every concept humans will later take for granted. Farming, cities, writing, money, and, yes, accounting. But tonight, you'll glide through its birth slowly, almost dreamlike, following the quiet trail of clay, water, and half-sleepy innovation. Picture yourself walking along a raised dike. The mud squelches under your bare feet, warm as bread dough. You pass small plots of barley and emmer wheat, their green blades whispering in the wind. Farmers shout lazily to each other, measuring success not in gold, but in how many goats their neighbor still owes them. You stop to watch a child, barely 8 years old, counting lumps of clay with little holes poked through them. She's threading them on a piece of twine like beads. Each lump stands for one measure of grain, or one sheep, or something her father will definitely forget by next week if she doesn't keep track. This, right here, is the beginning of data entry. The mainstream historical fact here: Sumerian farmers actually used small clay tokens shaped like cones, spheres, and discs to represent goods, long before writing existed. That's the moment civilization starts talking to itself in numbers instead of words. The fringe tidbit: some archaeologists believe those same tokens were stored in hollow clay balls called boule, which had to be broken open like a Kinder Surprise to read what was inside. Imagine trying to balance your books when your spreadsheet is a literal mystery egg. As evening slides in, you wander toward a cluster of reed huts glowing gold from oil lamps. The scent of cooking lentils floats in the air, earthy and soothing. People sit cross-legged around low tables, dipping flatbread into stews. There's laughter, soft and muffled, like the first echo of social media comments, half approval, half confusion. A scribe, the closest thing this world has to a numbers guy, leans over his bowl, muttering about the temple's grain ledger. He'll spend the night smoothing a patch of wet clay to record how much everyone owes after harvest. He doesn't know it yet, but he's inventing your future tax return. Historians still argue whether this place was truly the cradle of civilization or just the world's earliest experiment in organized complaining. Either way, this stretch of river becomes a laboratory for every concept humans will later take for granted. Farming, cities, writing, money, and, yes, accounting. But tonight, you'll glide through its birth slowly, almost dreamlike, following the quiet trail of clay, water, and half-sleepy innovation. You wander deeper into the village. Children chase each other with bits of dried mud, pretending they're sheep. Somewhere, an old woman hums a tune that's half lullaby, half math lesson, reminding the little ones that 5 goats today means 5 bowls tomorrow. Her voice floats above the rustle of palm fronds, steady and hypnotic. Everywhere you look, life moves in deliberate rhythm. Slow, repetitive, almost meditative. It's the perfect world to fall asleep in if you ignore the mosquitoes. The villagers settle into the night, the lamps dim, a soft wind sighs through the reeds, brushing against your skin. Someone nearby scrapes the stylus across clay, a quiet, scratchy sound like sandpaper on a seashell. That tiny noise is the sound of history starting to record itself. You crouch closer. The scribe's stylus is made of reed, cut to a wedge shape. He presses it into a fresh tablet, one neat mark for every sheep borrowed by a neighbor named Enlil, who definitely has a habit of forgetting to pay back. He pauses, counts on his fingers, frowns, then erases with a wet fingertip. That's the first time in history someone says, "Wait, I miscalculated." He chuckles, smooths the clay again, and keeps going. Each impression catches the lamplight, soft and golden. The air hums with a stillness that feels older than time itself. And you, standing there, half dreaming, feel the edges of the story blur. The river keeps flowing, the reeds whisper their endless arithmetic. Somewhere a frog croaks the same note again and again, like a metronome guiding humanity into its next experiment, keeping track of everything so nothing gets lost. You take one last look at the river before you drift inward, your breath sinking with its rhythm. The world is about to invent memory outside the mind, and it all starts here, in the mud between 2 sleepy rivers, under a sky that doesn't yet know what numbers mean.
You wake, or maybe you never quite fell asleep, to the sound of sheep. It's a gentle chorus, half bleat, half complaint, echoing across the open fields. Morning in summer begins not with roosters, but with wool. The air is thick with the smell of grass, river mud, and something faintly like warm bread baking somewhere far off. You wander toward a cluster of low fences, where farmers with sun-darkened skin shuffle through the herd, each clutching a stick marked with small notches. Those sticks are memory in physical form, primitive but dependable. Without them, the difference between 10 sheep and 12 could spark a week of heated argument. You stand beside a man who's trying to count, though every time he gets close to the right number, a lamb wanders off. He sighs, starts again, and mutters something that sounds universal in every language. Why can't they just stay still? You smile, because somewhere in this frustration lies the seed of innovation. Counting sheep, long before it became a metaphor for sleep, is serious business. Historians still argue whether Sumerians invented counting because they wanted fairness, or because they were simply tired of being cheated. Either way, necessity is the mother of math. And this morning, you're watching math take its first baby steps. A small boy beside you has a pouch full of oddly shaped lumps, little clay cones and spheres, each about the size of a grape. He explains proudly that each cone stands for a sheep, each sphere for a jar of oil, and each flat disc for a basket of grain. His father can't read, of course. No one really can yet. But these little shapes speak to him. They're the first emojis of economics. You crouch beside the boy as he lays the tokens in a neat row on a reed mat. Every time a sheep passes through the narrow gate, he nudges one cone to the side. His father watches approvingly, half distracted by a goat attempting to eat his robe. The mainstream historical fact here: archaeologists have found thousands of these clay counting tokens dating back to around 8000 BCE, long before written language appeared. The fringe tidbit: some of these shapes may have been color-coded or painted with mineral dyes to show ownership or temple affiliation, meaning prehistoric accountants might also have been part-time artists. The sheep shuffle forward lazily, their wool dusted with sand. One bleats so loudly it startled a nearby heron into flight. You can almost feel the rhythm of life here. Slow, repetitive, oddly soothing. Everything that matters is countable. Animals, grain, jars of oil. Everything that doesn't, well, there's no clay shape for that yet. Love, laziness, or envy vanish with the sunset. You wander down toward the shade of a date palm, where an elderly woman sits grinding barley. She nods at you, then gestures at a small pouch tied to her belt, filled with her own set of tokens. She laughs softly when you ask what they mean. "This one," she says, holding up a small cylinder, "is how much grain the temple owes me." You sense pride in her voice, the kind of pride that comes from being seen, recorded, remembered, even if only in a handful of clay bits. Later, you follow the villagers to a dusty open space near the river. It's market day, which in Sumer means more bleeding animals, more shouting, and more clay. Traders squat in circles, swapping goods, gossip, and tokens. One man hands another a handful of small discs and receives a bundle of reeds in return. No gold changes hands, just promises, baked in mud. A breeze stirs the smell of fish and river water. You hear someone joke that if you lose your tokens, you lose your fortune. You can't help thinking that 5,000 years later, people will still say the same thing. Only now the tokens will be passwords and pins. As the sun climbs higher, you find shade beneath a palm. The counting continues. Sheep, goats, jars, baskets. The world hums in numerical rhythm. Somewhere, a scribe begins scratching symbols onto a clay lump, inspired by the farmer's tokens. The marks are crude, but each one stands for something real, something tangible. You're watching language start to uncoil from math, like a vine searching for sunlight. Historians still argue whether these early symbols were writing or just memory aids, visual shorthand for overworked brains. But under this hot Sumerian sky, the difference doesn't matter. You can feel humanity leaning forward, eager to store thoughts somewhere safer than memory. You move with the merchants toward the edge of town. There, the temple rises. Not a grand ziggurat yet, but a squat, tiered platform of sun-baked bricks. The priests wait at its base, collecting tokens in clay jars sealed with a thumbprint. Taxes, donations, offerings. It's hard to tell where generosity ends and obligation begins. Inside the temple courtyard, it's cooler, shadowed. The walls shimmer faintly with lime wash. A priest greets you with a tired smile and a reed stylus tucked behind his ear. Counting, he sighs, never ends.
He gestures toward shelves lined with sealed clay balls, bula, each one containing tokens for a different transaction. They rattle faintly when you shake them. He picks one up, weighing it in his hand. Inside this, he says, is how much grain the fisherman owes the potter. Then he shrugs. Or maybe it's how much beer the potter owes me. We'll find out when it's opened. You both laugh quietly. The first audit, it seems, will also be the first headache. Outside, the afternoon hums. The scent of barley beer drifts in from somewhere, yeasty and comforting. Villagers rest in the shade, murmuring softly. You lie back on the warm ground, the clay dust coating your palms, and imagine what it must feel like to hold the world's first account of anything. The weight of it, the permanence, the idea that memory no longer needs to live only inside your head. As the light fades, a flock of birds wheel across the sky. The farmers call to one another, rounding up the last of their sheep. You close your eyes for a moment and listen to the sounds, the bleating, the murmured numbers, the gentle splash of the river. Counting has become music. Somewhere behind you, a child hums while stringing fresh clay cones onto a cord. Her voice drifts through the dusk, as steady as the river itself. And though she doesn't know it, every soft note she sings is keeping history in balance, one sleepy sheep at a time.
The next morning rises out of the mist like a half-remembered dream. The sun comes up, pink and lazy, over the reeds and rooftops. The smell of damp clay and barley porridge floats through the air. You wake to the faint clink of something small and hollow being turned over in careful hands. The village scribe is sitting cross-legged nearby, his tunic streaked with dust, a thin reed stylus resting behind one ear. He's studying one of those clay boulets, the sealed balls you saw yesterday, frowning slightly, as if he's trying to see through it. Every so often he shakes it next to his ear, listening to the soft rattle of tokens inside. The sound is delicate, almost musical, like distant rain on a roof. It's the music of an accountant's imagination. Eventually he sighs. "This," he mutters to no one in particular, "is ridiculous." You can't help smiling. That's how every good invention starts. He dips his stylus into a bowl of wet clay, then flattens a new tablet against his knee. "If I just press the tokens onto the clay," he muses, "then I don't have to keep opening and closing these things. Everyone can see the record without breaking it." You lean closer, curious. With a careful hand, he presses the edge of each token, cone, sphere, disc, into the soft surface, leaving shallow impressions. The pattern looks like nothing at all, yet everything at once. A list, a promise, a memory externalized. When he's done, he holds it up to the light and grins. "There," he says proudly. "Now we know what's inside without smashing anything." And just like that, the world's first written record is born. Not a poem, not a prayer, but an inventory list. The clay tablet revolution has begun. The mainstream historical fact here, around 3300 BCE, the Sumerians began pressing shapes and symbols into wet clay to represent items, effectively transforming counting into proto-writing. The quirky tidbit? Some of the earliest tablets discovered record nothing but beer rations for workers, meaning humanity's first written words were, more or less, 1 pint ode to Ur-Nammu. The scribe's hand moves slowly, deliberate as breathing. Each wedge-shaped mark catches the light like a miniature shadow. He doesn't know it, but his stylus will outlive every building in this town. Cuneiform, wedge writing, will go on to serve empires and accountants for over 3,000 years. And here you are, watching it appear for the first time, in the quiet between two rivers.
Historians still argue whether the idea came from one brilliant mind or simply evolved through generations of frustrated traders. But as the tablet dries in the sun, its marks harden into something eternal. Numbers have become language. You can almost feel civilization exhale in relief. You follow the scribe as he carries the tablet toward the temple storehouse. The space inside is cool and dry, lined with shelves made of palm wood. Hundreds of small clay tablets sit in rows, each marked with tiny wedges. It's an ancient library of transactions: grain, goats, beer, oil, all accounted for in precise detail. He places the fresh tablet among them and steps back, brushing his hands clean. "Someday," he says quietly, "someone will read this and know exactly what we had today." You glance around at the rows of clay, at the faint smell of earth and time, and realize he's right. The past is beginning to store itself. Outside, the marketplace hums. A woman argues cheerfully over the price of fish, waving a damp reed receipt like a badge of honor. Children run through puddles, their laughter blending with the low murmur of trade. You stroll through the crowd, the ground cool beneath your feet, and spot another scribe under a shade awning. He's teaching a group of apprentices how to press marks into clay. Each student's tablet looks slightly different, some neat and tidy, others chaotic and charming, like a toddler's first spreadsheet. He corrects them gently. The wedge must lean left, like it's resting after a long day. You like that. Writing as a posture of exhaustion. It suits the tone of this whole civilization, sleepy but determined. You pause beside a potter's stall. On his table lies a broken tablet, shards scattered like puzzle pieces. You can still see the marks on it, some kind of list, perhaps. He laughs when you ask about it. "Dropped it in the kiln," he says. "Guess that debt's eternal now." You both chuckle. The first unintentional permanent record. Somewhere in the future, archaeologists will thank him for that mistake. The sun drifts overhead. The air hums with heat and commerce. The town's edge glimmers with the reflection of the river, lazy as ever. You wander there, feeling the mud give under your heels. Each step leaves a print that dries in the sun, a fleeting mirror of the tablets, impressions of presence, proof of passage. Near the water, a boy is trying to copy the marks he's seen on his father's clay. His stylus is a stick, his tablet is just a patch of riverbank. He presses careful wedges into the mud, then watches as a tiny wave washes them away. He frowns for a moment, then smiles, and starts again. Learning in its purest form. You glance back toward the village. From this distance, the rooftops blend with the horizon, a mosaic of clay and light. Smoke drifts from small fires, curling lazily upward. Somewhere in the middle of it all, the scribe sits in his hut, writing another record, unaware that he's just rewritten the rules of memory. Historians still argue whether writing made people freer or simply busier. Before, you could forget your debts by accident. Now, the clay remembers you. But as the evening light warms the tablets, stacked along the temple wall, it feels less like oppression and more like order, a quiet hum of things finally making sense. You sit by the river's edge, watching the water slide past. A frog croaks. The wind moves through the reeds like slow applause. Above you, the first stars blink awake. You imagine them as tiny wedge marks scattered across the sky. A cosmic tablet. Nobody's finished writing yet. For a moment, everything feels connected. The sheep, the clay, the stars, even the faint scratching of styluses in the distance. Civilization, you realize, didn't start with grandeur. It started with keeping track of who owed whom a few sheep and a jug of beer. The scribe's laugh drifts through the twilight, soft, satisfied, ancient. You close your eyes and let the rhythm of his work lull you. The scratch of clay against reed blending with the whisper of the river. You're drifting now, between history and dream. in the place where writing first whispered the world into permanence.
The next day opens not with birdsong, but with the low hum of temple life. You find yourself standing at the base of the great structure, the temple courtyard, its bricks still cool from the night air. The rising sun paints it in shades of honey and gold, while the smell of burnt offerings lingers faintly in the breeze. You stretch, feeling the weight of ancient bureaucracy pressing down, like the world's first Monday morning. Inside, scribes shuffle about with quiet efficiency, arms full of clay tablets still damp from yesterday's work. Each one carries lists of goats owed, barley delivered, oil consumed, beer rationed. The air feels thick with numbers. You wander past one man carefully stacking tablets on a shelf. He sighs and mutters, "If the wind blows wrong, the whole economy collapses." You can't tell if he's joking. Probably not. Historians still argue whether these temples were truly religious centers or simply the first government offices disguised with incense. The line between sacred and administrative was blurry. The gods needed grain after all, and someone had to count it. The priests became accountants, the offerings became taxes, and suddenly worship looked suspiciously like paperwork. You follow the sound of a stylus scratching, slow, rhythmic, hypnotic. In a shaded corner, a scribe with a shaved head sits cross-legged beside an enormous clay ledger. His hands move with steady grace, pressing wedge after wedge, line after line. Beside him sits a small jar of sesame oil and a cup of beer, both slowly evaporating under the heat. 2 jars of oil, he murmurs, from Ur-Lugal. 3 loaves of barley bread. 1 goat, missing. He frowns and makes another mark, slightly heavier this time. His expression is somewhere between devotion and exhaustion. You sit down nearby, cross-legged on the warm stone. The courtyard hums with small movements, sandals sliding, clay being lifted, voices reciting lists. A few children dart between the columns, laughing, their games echoing against the brick. One pretends to be a priest, lifting an imaginary stylus toward the sky. The mainstream historical fact here, temples in early Sumerian city-states like Uruk and Eridu served as economic hubs, managing grain storage, labor distribution, and trade. They were the first institutions to centralize record-keeping. The quirky tidbit? Archaeologists have found clay tablets from these temple archives that include not only lists of taxes, but also recipes for beer and the names of temple goats, complete with what may have been nicknames. Yes, the first bureaucracy had a personal touch. A breeze drifts through the open courtyard, stirring the faint scent of clay and barley. You glance toward a corner where an older priest is teaching an apprentice how to roll a cylinder seal across a tablet. Tiny carved images pressed into the clay to mark ownership. The seal shows a procession of tiny animals walking behind a horned god. When rolled, it leaves a continuous, looping pattern, beautiful and bureaucratic at the same time. You can't help but smile. The first signatures in history weren't written, they were rolled. Historians still argue whether these seals were symbols of power or protection, whether people truly believed their gods approved of every trade, or if invoking divine imagery simply made the paperwork harder to argue with. Either way, the system worked. Trade increased, temples grew rich, and accounting became the closest thing Sumer had to immortality. You wander deeper inside. The temple walls are thick, cool, faintly damp. Oil lamps burn in alcoves, their flames barely moving in the still air. A priest passes by, chanting softly, something about the god Enlil and the importance of accurate grain measurement. You follow him to the rear chamber, where tall clay jars stand in perfect rows, each one sealed, each one labeled with a neat inscription. It's quiet in here, almost reverent. The jars seem to hum in the silence, their contents measured to the last grain. You trail your fingers along one, feeling the indentations of the cuneiform marks beneath your touch. It's oddly satisfying, like running your hand over the world's first spreadsheet. The priest gestures to a small window high on the wall. Through it, a shaft of sunlight falls onto a single tablet resting on a stand. He smiles faintly. That, he says, is the temple's first account of harvest tribute. It tells us how much the gods have received this year. He pauses, his tone softening. Of course, the gods don't check the math. We do. Outside again, the day grows hotter. The courtyard hums with new energy as more scribes arrive, each with fresh clay balanced on wooden boards. They set the clay in the shade, dampening it occasionally with water from reed flasks. Every mark matters. Every mistake lasts forever. A young apprentice leans close to his mentor. "What if I press the wrong symbol?" he asks nervously. The older man chuckles. "Then you pray to the river and start again." He gestures toward a pile of discarded tablets, all cracked or misshapen. "That's the god of second chances," he says, smiling. You take a seat under a palm awning, watching it all unfold. The first office, the first bureaucracy, the first group of overworked employees trying to look busy while staying awake. A woman brings water. Another distributes tablets. Someone yawns. The rhythm of work is strangely familiar, even soothing. A clay tablet slips from a scribe's lap, lands with a dull thud, and cracks in two. He groans softly and mutters something that probably translates to, "Not again." You stifle a laugh. The man beside him pats his shoulder sympathetically. He says, "Don't worry, at least the gods don't require quarterly reports." Evening descends slowly over the courtyard. The scribes gather their tablets, setting them on drying racks. The last marks of the day harden under the fading light, little wedges turning from soft brown to stone gray. Somewhere a priest rings a small bronze bell. The sound hangs in the air like a punctuation mark. You lean back against a column, listening to the murmur of closing tasks and quiet chatter. It's easy to forget that this simple act, recording, listing, counting, is the backbone of civilization. Without it, the grain spoils, the debts vanish, and no one remembers who owes the temple goat number 7. As darkness gathers, the lamps flicker on again. Shadows stretch across the courtyard like lines on a tablet. The scribes pack away their styluses, the priests recite brief prayers of accuracy, and the temple falls into that peculiar kind of silence only found in offices after hours. The smell of baked clay lingers in the air, a reminder that memory has been molded, dried, and stored away. You close your eyes, breathing in the quiet. The reeds whisper outside. The night hums with life. Crickets, frogs, the faint splash of the river against the shore. Somewhere, deep within the temple, a lone scribe keeps writing, his stylus tapping softly like a heartbeat. You smile, half asleep already, as the sound fades into the rhythm of your own breathing.
When morning returns, it comes slow and golden again. The city outside the temple stirs awake. Potters opening kilns, fishermen calling across the river, the first donkeys of the day trotting toward the market. You wake on the same stone bench beneath the palm awning, blinking at the light. The temple courtyard is quieter today. The work goes on, but softer somehow, as if the scribes themselves are still half dreaming. Someone has left a jug of beer and a few barley cakes near the door. You take one, because that's what anyone would have done 5,000 years ago. Breakfast of accountants and gods. The bread is dry,
the beer slightly sour. Both taste like history. You wander back toward the record chamber. The old priest from yesterday is still there, still surrounded by jars and tablets. He nods at you, smiling faintly. "Another day of counting the gifts of the gods," he says. You smile back. "Did the gods ever send thank you notes?" He laughs, a quiet, breathy sound. "Only floods." He gestures toward a fresh pile of wet clay. "Sit. I will show you how to write the word for barley." You kneel beside him. He presses your hand into the clay, guiding your fingers around the stylus. The wedge cuts easily, cleanly, leaving a mark that feels both strange and deeply right. One triangle for the stalk, one for the grain, one for the measure. "Barley," he says softly, "the word that built our city." It's not an exaggeration. Barley was everything: food, drink, currency, offering. Some tablets list wages not in silver, but in liters of barley per month. A laborer might earn 10 liters, a priest 50, an overseer 100, and a goat. The math of life neatly pressed into wet earth. The priest points to another mark. "This means 1 gur," he explains, a Sumerian unit, roughly equal to 300 liters. He pauses, squinting at the clay. "Enough for a small feast or a large mistake?" You laugh quietly, the sound echoing off the temple walls. It feels impossible that this small, repetitive act, pressing shapes into clay, became the foundation of civilization. Yet it did. Every word you've ever read, every law, every poem, every grocery list owes something to this moment, a triangle in clay, a record that refused to vanish. Outside, the city hums louder now. The marketplace is alive again, vendors shouting, coins clinking, the faint smell of dates and fish. You step into the sunlight and follow the sound. Down the street, you pass stalls stacked with copper tools, woven baskets, and baked fish wrapped in reeds. Children chase each other through the dust, waving palm fronds like flags. Someone plays a reed flute, the melody looping lazily through the air. At the market gate stands a man wearing a cylinder seal around his neck like a badge. He's a trader, his robes trimmed in faint red dye, a rare luxury. On his table sits a small stack of tablets, each stamped with intricate symbols. "These," he explains proudly to anyone who asks, "prove my grain shipments to the temple." You recognize one of the markings: barley. A woman nearby laughs. "And if your shipment sinks in the river?" The man shrugs. "Then I still have proof it existed." It's hard not to smile. This was the first idea of insurance, that the record itself could protect you even when the goods were gone. A transaction written in clay carried weight long after the cargo disappeared beneath the reeds. The Sumerians didn't know it yet, but they had invented something astonishing: trust at scale. The idea that two strangers could trade without knowing each other, as long as they both believed in the symbols pressed into clay. From there, it was only a matter of time before someone invented debt, taxes, and accountants with headaches. You sit on the edge of a fountain, watching a boy lead a goat through the crowd. The animal bleats indignantly, tugging at the rope. The boy mutters under his breath, "You're lucky you're sacred." The water in the fountain is muddy, but cool. A few silver fish darted beneath the surface. You let the sound wash over you. The laughter, the trade calls, the endless rhythm of a city that has learned to count itself. Somewhere nearby, a woman tells a story about the god Enki teaching humans how to measure grain. In her version, Enki grows tired of divine feasts going unrecorded, so he sends a dream to a farmer, showing him how to mark tallies on wet clay. The next morning, the farmer wakes, counts his harvest, and finds that he feels calmer, anchored. That's how civilization began, with the relief of knowing how much was enough. As the sun lowers toward the horizon, the marketplace begins to empty. Traders pack up their goods. Children carry home bundles of reeds. The goat finally gets its way and stops walking. You rise, dusting off your robe, and start back toward the temple. At the city gate, you pause to look back. The skyline of Uruk, low and ancient, glows under the copper light. Smoke drifts from hearths, and the river glitters like molten glass. It's quiet again, except for the faint tapping of styluses somewhere in the distance. The scribes are still working, their marks drying into permanence. You think about the priest's words about the gods never checking the math. Maybe they didn't need to. Maybe the act of counting itself was a kind of prayer, a ritual of order against chaos. Every mark, a reminder that someone was paying attention. Night returns. The stars over Sumer are sharp and countless. The air smells of clay, barley, and distant rain. You lie back on the warm stone outside the temple, the sounds of the city fading into a slow, steady hush. The last thing you hear before sleep is the faint scratching of a stylus inside, still recording the world, one wedge at a time. The first accountants of history never dreamed their notes would outlast their bones, but here they are, 5,000 years later. Soft voices and hardened clay, whispering the same ancient truth.
The next morning, the temple courtyard hums again, this time with irritation. You can hear it before you even open your eyes. The slap of sandals, the rustle of clay tablets being shuffled like oversized playing cards, and the deep sigh of someone who has already lost count before breakfast. You step into the chamber to find a scene that could only be described as ancient chaos. Clay tablets everywhere, some drying in the sun, others stacked like collapsing loaves of bread. Two young scribes are arguing over whose handwriting looks more official, while an overseer is pacing with both hands on his head. A priest near the back waves you over and whispers, "We've lost the barley record for the third moon." You blink. How do you lose a clay tablet? He points toward a dark corner where a nervous-looking boy stands beside an overturned jar. It fell into the beer supply. You try not to laugh. So now the temple's drinking its own taxes? He stares at you, deadpan. It's not funny. Then after a long pause, okay, maybe a little. This, though no one realizes it yet, is the first paperwork panic in recorded history. The world's first audit crisis. The moment when humanity discovered that record-keeping, once invented, could never be perfectly tidy again. You watch as the high priest convenes an emergency council. A dozen scribes gather around the main table, where a half-dried tablet sits like evidence in a trial. One man insists the missing barley must have been carried off by rats. Another claims it was accidentally double-counted. A third blames evil spirits of disorganization. Historians still argue whether this moment represents the dawn of bureaucracy or simply humanity being itself, perpetually confused but trying to look busy. The high priest raises a hand for silence. "We will make more copies. From now on, each record shall be pressed twice, one for the temple, one for the gods." You lean toward a nearby scribe and whisper, "Does the gods' copy get better handwriting?" He smirks. The gods don't complain about smudges. And so begins duplication, the first backup system, a revolution born not from wisdom, but from spilled beer. The scribes fan out, collecting damp clay and fresh tablets. You notice how each stylus movement now carries a quiet anxiety, a new awareness that mistakes have consequences, not cosmic, but practical. If a tablet goes missing, someone loses their barley. If a number is miswritten, someone gets shorted a loaf of bread. It's easy to forget, 5 millennia later, how fragile order was. These little wedges weren't abstract symbols, they were food, wages, faith. Every mark mattered. You walk outside for air. The sun beats down on the ziggurat's pale stone, and the city stretches endlessly below. The river curves like a silver snake through fields of green barley. Somewhere beyond those fields, traders are already arguing about quantities and measures. Somewhere else, a scribe is dozing mid-tally. Sumer, for all its glory, is learning a hard truth. When you create systems, the systems start creating you. A boy runs past you, clutching a small tablet. "They told me to deliver this to the brewer," he pants. You peek at the marks. A list of ingredients: barley, date syrup, yeast, water. The earliest known recipe, written not for cuisine, but for accounting. The brewer greets him with a grin. "Finally, the order's official." You watch as he carefully sets the tablet beside a steaming vat. In a few hours, that beer will be poured for workers, and another tablet will be made to note the distribution. Each sip accounted for. It's almost beautiful, the precision, the structure. And yet, under it all, there's a faint hum of fatigue. Everyone seems a little weary of their own cleverness. You can see it in the slouch of the scribes, the droop of the priest's eyelids, the way the clay dust clings to everything. At sunset, a meeting is called in the central hall. The priestly accountants sit in rows, fanning themselves with reed tablets, waiting for the verdict on the missing records. The high priest enters, his robe trailing behind him like a dusty cloud. "The gods have forgiven our errors, but next time there will be no forgiveness, only recalculation." A groan ripples through the hall. You can't help smiling. Somewhere in that groan is the sound of every future bureaucrat's soul, already ancient, already tired. As night falls, you sit by the temple steps again, watching lamps flicker on across the city. The stars glint faintly in the black water of the Euphrates. The panic is past, the order restored, the records redone. But the real shift has already happened. A civilization that once trusted memory now trusts clay. People who once lived by the river's rhythm now live by the ledgers. And somewhere deep down, you realize humanity will never unclench again.
The next time you blink, the world smells of dust and distance. The temple is behind you now, and in front of you, stretching beyond the horizon, lie trade routes like faint threads across the desert. You're standing beside a caravan of donkeys loaded with jars, baskets, and bundles of reed matting, all labeled with small, neat clay tokens. The Sumerians have learned to travel with their numbers. Each merchant carries a pouch of hardened tablets, carefully wrapped in cloth. These are the passports of the ancient world, records of cargo, contracts of exchange, proof that what they're selling truly exists somewhere else. You run your fingers across one, the wedge marks smooth and cool under your touch. A man with a sun-scorched face grins at you. "Don't drop it," he warns. "That's 30 jars of sesame oil." You hand it back quickly. "You count everything?" He laughs. "Everything that can disappear." You walk beside the caravan as it lurches forward, bells tinkling around the donkeys' necks. The path winds past barley fields, into open scrubland where acacia trees hunch low against the wind. The horizon shimmers in the heat. It's slow going, trade always is, but you can feel the hum of something extraordinary. The first web of global connection being spun by weary men in sandals. The sun dips, and the caravan halts at a small oasis, a pool of water, a few date palms, and a scattering of reed huts. Traders from other cities are already camped here, Akkadians, Elamites, and maybe even someone from the far Indus Valley, their faces half hidden by cloth wraps. They speak in different tongues, but the clay speaks for all of them. One merchant slides a tablet across the ground like a card in a poker game. Another nods solemnly and adds his cylinder seal, a little roll that leaves an intricate signature pattern when pressed. The first global handshake, done in silence and mud. Historians still argue whether this was the birth of economics or the moment humans collectively agreed to never trust each other again. That night, under a wide and starless sky,
You sit with a group of traders eating flatbread and lentil stew. The air hums with quiet conversation. Someone tells a story about a caravan lost in the dunes because its scribe fell asleep mid-count. Someone else swears he once saw a tablet with so many numbers it cracked under its own weight. You smile into your bowl. The humor is dry like the land itself, but it's real. Even here, far from temples and gods, people make jokes about math. The next morning, you wake early and walk among the resting donkeys. The desert light is pale and gold. A young trader is sitting cross-legged, recopying a tablet. You watch him work, his stylus scratching faintly, his brow furrowed. He's making a new copy of yesterday's transaction to carry home. In case the first gets lost, he says quietly. You nod. You really don't trust the gods with paperwork, do you? He chuckles. The gods don't give receipts. As the caravan continues, you begin to notice something strange. Every few miles, you pass a small clay marker beside the road, a kind of milestone, half buried in the sand. Some are scratched with names of towns, others with tallies of distance. It's as if the merchants have started writing the landscape itself, turning the road into a ledger. It's a beautiful thought that the act of recording doesn't just describe the world, it creates it. By midday, you reach another settlement, a bustling trade post where the air smells of copper and salt. Ships made of reeds bob on the riverbank, ready to ferry goods north. On shore, a scribe sits cross-legged beside a crate of tablets, calling out names. 2 baskets of lapis lazuli, 4 jars of honey, 3 bolts of wool. You realize you've just witnessed the invention of shipping manifests. Behind him, a woman in a linen robe approaches with a frown. "Excuse me, someone wrote my husband's name on the wrong tablet." The scribe sighs. "Ma'am, if it's written, it's written." She crosses her arms. "Then you'd better write that it's wrong." You can't help it. You laugh out loud. Somewhere, the concept of bureaucratic correction has just been born. By evening, the trade post glows under oil lamps. The smell of roasting fish drifts through the air. A group of scribes sit outside, passing around a jug of date wine, joking about the ones who count while the rest of the world dreams. You sit among them, half listening, half mesmerized by the flickering firelight on the clay tablets. They shine like dull gold, tiny mirrors of human effort. One of the scribes sighs. "You know," he says, "I sometimes think the gods made us so they wouldn't have to do the paperwork." The others chuckle, too tired to disagree. Later that night, you walk alone by the river. The stars have returned, bright and countless. The water carries the reflection of the lamps, the faint murmur of traders, the soft grunt of donkeys shifting in their sleep. You crouch by the bank and trace your finger through the mud, making small wedge shapes. For a moment, you feel what they must have felt, the fragile piece of order carved into chaos, a human heartbeat rendered in symbols. Somewhere downstream, someone else is doing the same thing, writing, counting, marking time. The river will carry both of your traces away, mixing them into one long, endless record. When you finally close your eyes, the world feels steady again. Numbers drifting like stars, tablets drying in moonlight, the desert whispering through the dunes. And as you drift toward sleep, one thought hums softly through the dark. Civilization didn't begin with kings or wars. It began with someone, somewhere, trying not to lose count.
Dawn spreads slowly over the horizon, casting pale light across the river's surface. You awaken to the low hum of activity, oars splashing in shallow water, reeds rustling, and the faint clatter of clay tokens being shifted in baskets. The traders you followed yesterday are already preparing for departure, arranging jars and sacks in careful stacks. You step down to the riverbank, where small reed boats wait like floating logs.
Each vessel carries tablets, baskets, and bundles marked meticulously with clay impressions. A young boy runs along the shore, balancing a cylinder seal on his head. He wobbles precariously, muttering, "Don't fall! The record must survive!" You smile. Centuries from now, someone might call this the first data protection. Historians still argue whether these river routes were trade networks or simply safer paths than crossing the desert on foot. Either way, they carried more than goods. They carried memory. A tablet that reached another town could guarantee payment, prevent disputes, or even secure a temple's favor. You climb aboard a boat alongside a merchant whose robes are pale from dust. He carries a stack of clay tablets secured with reed cords. "These are for the city across the river," he explains. "Do not tip them. Do not spill them. Do not think about dropping them." The boat rocks gently. You can feel the river's slow pulse beneath you, carrying you forward as if the water itself is enforcing order. The merchant checks each tablet, pressing it lightly with his palm, making sure no cracks have formed. One bad impression, and I'll be explaining to the temple why I delivered 40 jars of honey instead of 41. You trace the edge of a tablet, feeling the cool wedge shapes under your fingers. They are oddly soothing, like braille for a civilization that has just discovered permanence. Each mark is both number and story, fact and promise. As you drift downriver, you pass reed huts along the shore. A woman is grinding barley with a pestle, her movements rhythmic and steady. She glances up, smiling briefly, then resumes counting each scoop into a basket. You remember how the Sumerians once used tokens just like this, long before writing existed. The continuity of human effort feels almost sacred. By mid-morning, the boat slows near a cluster of trading posts. You hear haggling in multiple languages, Akkadian, Elamite, perhaps even distant Indus dialects. Yet the clay tablets provide a universal language. A cylinder seal here, a wedge imprint there, contracts, receipts, inventories, all readable across cultural boundaries. Quirky tidbit, some tablets include drawings of animals to indicate origin, ownership, or even temperament. You spot a goat with a playful twist of the horn, suggesting the scribe had a sense of humor. Mainstream historical fact, these marks were the precursors to cuneiform, the wedge-shaped writing system that would define the ancient Near East. As you dock, the merchants unload cargo with careful precision. Each tablet is checked again, pressed gently into place. One apprentice accidentally drops a small tablet into the river. He freezes in horror. The merchant sighs. "We'll call it a lost record. The gods understand, we hope." You wander among the small market stalls. A potter shows off jars stamped with tally marks for shipments. A baker measures flour in exact portions, and a scribe tallies fish caught that morning. Everywhere the principle is the same: record everything, trust the clay, and hope the numbers hold. Historians still argue whether the Sumerians were more interested in bureaucracy or storytelling. Perhaps it was both. Each record preserves life: what was owed, what was received, what was eaten. They are simultaneously pragmatic and poetic. As the sun climbs, you notice the shimmer of mud drying in the heat. Tablets harden to stone, jars settle into position, and the market pulses with quiet order. You sit beneath a date palm, listening to children play and merchants argue softly. The sound is steady, rhythmic, the heartbeat of civilization learning to count itself. By evening, the boats are packed. The tablets are secure, and the river reflects the orange glow of sunset. The merchants toast briefly with barley beer, a small ritual acknowledging survival, trade, and the fragile brilliance of record-keeping. You lean back, letting the cool breeze carry the scent of river and clay. Somewhere, a scribe scratches in soft mud, leaving new impressions that will dry into history. The world feels both enormous and intimate, held together by tiny wedges pressed carefully into clay. And as the last light fades, you realize the truth. This is not just trade, it is memory, imagination, and the quiet, persistent insistence of humanity to be counted.
The morning sun rises lazily over the river delta, turning the water into ribbons of molten gold. You wake on the sand beside the last trading post, the faint hum of reeds swaying in the breeze lulling you back into consciousness. The river is alive with movement, boats pushing off, donkeys braying, merchants shouting softly across the water. You follow a young scribe who balances a stack of tablets in one arm while guiding a donkey with the other. The clay is still cool, smooth to the touch, carrying the faint scent of baked mud. You notice his concentration, each wedge-shaped mark pressed with deliberation, each line measured and steady. A mistake here is not just an error, it is a story written wrong. Historians still argue whether the Sumerians invented writing for gods or for themselves. Perhaps both. Each tablet is simultaneously prayer and receipt, offering and accounting, a whisper to the future that someone, somewhere, was here and counted. You watch the scribe arrive at a large warehouse by the riverbank. Inside, jars and baskets are stacked like miniature ziggurats, labeled in neat cuneiform. A clerk runs along the aisles, checking against his own tablets. Every movement is deliberate, almost ritualistic. Quirky tidbit, some of the earliest known tablets record beer rations and labor duties, meaning the first administrative records were essentially brewery pay stubs. Mainstream historical fact, these tablets are considered the earliest forms of cuneiform writing, which would dominate the Near East for millennia. Outside, children dart between the warehouse and the boats, mimicking the scribes. You notice one boy pressing wedge shapes into wet sand, copying the tablets with surprising accuracy. The apprentice giggles as a small wave washes away his work. He starts again, unfazed, perhaps learning the first lesson in impermanence and patience. The scribe gestures for you to follow. "Come," he says, "you must see the transfer log." You walk alongside him as he carefully lifts tablets, matching each wedge against his own record. "If the numbers do not align, someone goes hungry," he murmurs. A trader from across the river approaches, carrying a reed-wrapped tablet. The two men exchange nods and press their cylinder seals into clay. You realize that this is more than trade. It is trust, built on impressions pressed into mud that will outlive the participants. As the day wears on, the warehouse hums with quiet productivity. Workers carry jars, scribes tally quantities, and merchants negotiate lightly. There is a rhythm here, steady and almost hypnotic. You feel yourself slipping into it, lulled by the soft tapping of stylus against clay. Later, a woman enters carrying a small tablet, frowning. "The barley count is off," she says. The clerks groan. The scribe takes it calmly, checking every mark. "One token misplaced," he mutters. "We will adjust. The world survives." You step outside, letting the warm air wash over you. The river sparkles in the late afternoon sun. The boats rock gently, carrying cargo that has been counted, measured, and recorded countless times. The air smells faintly of water, mud, and baked clay, the scent of civilization learning its own rhythms. A bird lands on a nearby reed, chirping softly. Somewhere, a child laughs. The scribes continue their work, their styluses scratching into clay as if the world itself depends on it. In truth, it does.
As dusk falls, you sit by the riverbank, watching shadows stretch across the water. The last light glints off the clay tablets, tiny mirrors of human effort. Each wedge, each mark is a note in the song of memory, persistence, and the quiet triumph of keeping count. And as night deepens, the river hums softly, carrying the impressions of the day downstream where the future awaits to read them.
The morning air feels cooler than usual, scented with wet clay and barley dust. You wake on the riverbank, the soft ripple of water against reeds marking the slow passage of time. Traders are stirring already, preparing the next leg of their journey. The temple behind you is a distant memory, but the lessons of clay and counting travel with you, etched into your mind like the wedges pressed into every tablet you've seen. A young scribe approaches, carrying a pile of tablets balanced like a precarious tower. He glances at you, eyes wide. "We must reach the next settlement before sundown," he says, "and every tablet must survive." You follow along the dusty path, passing fields where workers kneel in the soil, measuring, planting, counting every grain. You remember the story of the spilled barley, the first paperwork panic, and can't help but chuckle quietly. Civilization seems to thrive on tiny disasters. Historians still argue whether the Sumerians intended these records to be permanent or if permanence was merely a happy accident. Either way, you can see the beauty in it, the world meticulously documented, one wedge at a time. Along the route, you pass a small village. Smoke curls lazily from thatched roofs. A woman kneels beside a fire, stirring a pot of lentils, while a child counts grains beside her. You catch a glimpse of another tablet tucked under her arm. It appears to be a local inventory. Quirky tidbit, some of these early tablets include doodles of goats with comically exaggerated horns, suggesting that even in accounting, humor finds a place. You reach a narrow bridge spanning a shallow stream. Traders carefully guide their donkeys across, one tablet slipping dangerously close to the water. You hold your breath as a young boy lunges to catch it just in time. "Saved by reflex and devotion to numbers," he mutters. Inside the next settlement, the warehouse is bustling. You watch as goods are unloaded, jars of honey, baskets of dates, clay vessels of oil. Each is counted, weighed, and recorded meticulously. A scribe checks each mark, ensuring the numbers align with the previous day's record. One error, a miscounted jar, causes a ripple of murmurs. The clerks adjust the tally calmly, as if this small discrepancy has been anticipated for centuries. The main merchant approaches you. "Do you see?" he asks, gesturing to the organized stacks. Without records, this would be chaos. With them, even chaos obeys. The principle is simple but profound. Numbers make order possible. They turn fleeting moments into memory, accidental spills into structured consequence. Each tablet you touch carries weight beyond its clay, a testament to human diligence. By late afternoon, the traders rest. You sit beneath a palm, watching the sunlight bounce off the river. Children play near the boats, mimicking the scribes, pressing small wedges into wet sand. The apprentices' laughter echoes against the water, soft and light, reminding you that even amidst order and precision, life persists in playful disorder. Historians still argue whether Sumerian record-keeping was primarily practical or symbolic, a way to honor gods, assert power, or simply ensure survival. Perhaps all three are true. The wedge is both a tool and talisman. As the sun sets, lanterns glow along the riverbanks. The scribes continue their work, styluses tapping gently, almost like a lullaby. The river hums, reflecting the last light of day.
you feel a strange calm, knowing that the civilization you've been following persists not through swords or crowns, but through careful counting, patient diligence, and the soft rhythm of clay against stylus. And as night falls, you settle beside the water, letting the soft sounds of trade, laughter, and river lull you toward sleep. You realize the lesson is simple yet enduring. Civilization survives not by might alone, but by the patient act of keeping track, one wedge at a time.
Night passes slowly, wrapped in a blanket of stars reflected in the river. You wake to the faint scent of wet clay and cooking fires. The traders have already begun stirring. The sound of donkeys shifting and the low clatter of wooden tools fills the air. You rise, brushing sand and dust from your robe, and make your way toward the warehouse where the day's work will begin. Inside, a dozen scribes are seated cross-legged, styluses poised over damp clay tablets. Each mark is deliberate, each wedge placed with careful attention. You notice how each tablet is slightly different, some neatly pressed, others rougher, bearing the marks of a nervous apprentice, but all equally important. Even a small miscount could ripple through the entire chain of trade, affecting lives far from this spot. A clerk leans over, pointing to a tablet. "See this? 2 jars of honey are missing." He pauses. "Or maybe the gods took them." You chuckle quietly. Centuries from now, someone might call this superstition, but here it is practical humor, a gentle acknowledgement of human error. Historians still argue whether these tablets were primarily tools of administration or early storytelling devices. Perhaps they were both. Each wedge preserves a moment, a decision, a small triumph against disorder. Outside, children dart between stacks of crates, waving palm fronds and imitating the scribes. One boy has fashioned a small stylus from a reed, pressing lines into the sand with surprising accuracy. Quirky tidbit, archaeologists later find that Sumerian children sometimes practiced writing in sand before moving to clay, making them the earliest known students of accounting. By mid-morning, the warehouse is bustling with activity. Traders arrive with goods, clerks tally inventories, and the river hums softly outside. Every item, from jars of oil to baskets of barley, is accounted for, pressed into clay and recorded for posterity. You feel a strange calm observing it all, the rhythm of counting and recounting, strangely hypnotic. A young scribe whispers to you, "Sometimes I wonder if the gods watch these tablets." You smile. Maybe they do, maybe they don't. A bell rings, signaling the midday pause. Workers stretch, children scamper for shade, and the scribes examine their marks once more, ensuring consistency across every tablet. One of the apprentices accidentally drops a small tablet into a basket of grain. The clerk grins. "Well, at least the grain now has documentation." By afternoon, the light softens, filtering through the reed mats that shade the courtyard. You notice how each tablet carries a story beyond the numbers. The care of the scribe, the humor in small doodles, the quiet prayers embedded in repeated markings. The world is being recorded, and you are witnessing the act of civilization writing itself into permanence. As sunset approaches, the traders pack up, and the scribes set aside tablets to dry. The air is filled with a quiet satisfaction, the day's labor completed, mistakes noted, records secured. Outside, the river mirrors the fading light, carrying reflections of boats, lanterns, and the faint tapping of styluses. Historians still debate the significance of these records, but you can feel it intuitively. They are more than numbers. They are the bridge between fleeting moments and enduring memory. The rhythm of clay against stylus is the heartbeat of human diligence, echoing softly through time. And as night falls, you find a quiet spot by the riverbank, letting the soft sounds of trade, counting, and distant laughter lull you toward sleep, knowing that civilization persists in the gentle act of keeping count.
Dawn breaks slowly over the delta, painting the reeds and river in pale pinks and golds. You wake with the faint scent of wet clay still lingering in your hair, and the distant murmur of merchants preparing their next journey. Today, the caravan is moving east toward another trading post, carrying barley, honey, and clay tablets that record every single transaction. You follow alongside a young scribe balancing a stack of tablets. Each tablet is heavier than it looks, not just because of clay, but because of the responsibility pressed into it. A single miscount could cascade through the settlements, leaving families short, traders unpaid, and temples unsettled. Quirky tidbit: some Sumerian tablets include tiny drawings of goats, oxen, or fish to indicate which animal or commodity they referred to, adding a touch of early illustration to the otherwise serious work. Mainstream historical fact: these tablets are the direct ancestors of cuneiform writing, the world's first fully developed writing system. As the caravan trudges along the dusty road, the sun rises higher, casting long shadows across the landscape. You hear the distant bray of donkeys, the shuffle of feet, the rhythmic tapping of styluses pressing into wet clay. Historians still argue whether the Sumerians invented writing for economic necessity or as a method to communicate with the divine, but either way, it is mesmerizing to witness. You pause to rest beneath a date palm. A trader approaches, balancing a jar on his shoulder, and gestures to the tablets. "These must be copied exactly," he says, his voice quiet but firm. "One error, and someone may go hungry." You nod, imagining the careful concentration required, the weight of responsibility resting in the wedge-shaped impressions. By midday, the caravan arrives at a small settlement perched beside the river. Boats bob in the water, ready to transport goods further downstream. Merchants unload their wares carefully, while scribes check each tablet, matching the clay impressions to the cargo. A young apprentice giggles as he accidentally stamps his thumb on the corner of a tablet. The clerk smiles wryly. "Even gods appreciate humor," he murmurs. You wander through the marketplace, observing women measuring barley, men arranging jars of oil, children copying symbols in sand. Everywhere you see the principle of recording. Nothing is too small, too mundane, or too trivial to be counted. Every transaction, every grain, every jug has its place in the growing order of civilization. As afternoon light filters through the reeds, you notice the scribe carefully pressing a tablet against another, creating an exact duplicate. This early practice of record replication ensures that the loss of one tablet will not erase the memory of trade, inventory, or labor. It is a quiet triumph of foresight, born from experience, necessity, and a dash of human stubbornness. The river hums softly as night approaches, carrying reflections of lanterns and swaying reeds. You sit at the bank, watching children play near the water, their laughter mingling with the gentle lapping of the current. Somewhere, a scribe scratches into clay, marking the day's transactions. The act is both mundane and profound, preserving life, economy, and memory in one careful motion.
Historians still debate whether these records were intended to endure, or if longevity was a happy accident. But you sense that this gentle persistence, writing, copying, recording, is what gives civilization its steady pulse. As darkness settles, you lie back on the sand, listening to the river, the faint tapping of styluses, and the distant murmur of traders winding down. Sleep comes softly, carrying on the rhythm of human diligence and the quiet wonder of a world learning to keep count.
The next day dawns in soft layers of pink and orange over the delta, and you wake to the faint familiar scent of wet clay and warm barley. Traders are already preparing to move onward, their donkeys shifting under loads or jars, baskets, and reed bundles, while the river hums gently beside them. You rise slowly, brushing off sand, and join the caravan, feeling the rhythm of movement as it begins again. You notice the scribe from the previous settlement carefully balancing his stack of tablets. Each mark, each wedge, holds importance far beyond its size. A miscount could ripple across miles of trade and affect livelihoods in ways the Sumerians are only beginning to grasp. You realize that the practice of counting, recording, and duplicating is becoming second nature, a quiet ritual that orders life itself. Quirky tidbit: in some Sumerian tablets, the scribes drew tiny animals or exaggerated features to represent quantities humorously, like a goat with enormous horns, meaning 5 goats. Mainstream historical fact: these tablets are among the earliest examples of cuneiform writing, a system that would dominate the ancient Near East for thousands of years. As the caravan moves eastward, you pass desert plains dotted with villages and reed huts. You hear the faint laughter of children practicing tablet writing in sand, mimicking the scribes' movements. Some scribes shake their heads but smile, recognizing the inevitability of young apprentices testing their skills before they are entrusted with real tablets. Historians still debate whether these scribes were primarily clerks of economy or inadvertent chroniclers of life. Perhaps they were both, recording not just transactions but the pulse of civilization. Each tablet becomes a miniature snapshot, barely measured, jars counted, wages tallied, and yes, sometimes even a doodle or two slipped in for amusement. By mid-morning, the caravan reaches a small river crossing. Donkeys wade carefully through shallow water while merchants hand off tablets to clerks stationed on either side. The careful passing of these records ensures continuity. Every transaction is accounted for, every detail preserved. You notice the reverence in their movements, the deliberate care, as if each wedge carries not only ink and clay, but the weight of civilization itself. A merchant jokes quietly to a clerk about a lost tablet from years ago that was supposedly swallowed by a river god. The scribe chuckles, shaking his head. Humor, it seems, is an essential companion to diligence, even in the earliest records. As afternoon falls, you wander through a small settlement along the riverbank. Women weigh grain, children trace wedges in sand, and a group of scribes copies tablets meticulously in the shade. One apprentice frowns at a tablet, noticing a tiny discrepancy, and immediately sets about correcting it. The process is patient, deliberate, and strangely soothing. By evening, lanterns glow along the riverbank, casting soft reflections on the water. Traders rest, children play near the reeds, and scribes finalize their copies for the day. The gentle tapping of styluses on clay creates a rhythm, steady and hypnotic. You sit quietly, letting the sounds of trade, counting, and the river wash over you. Historians still argue whether Sumerian record-keeping was born of necessity, devotion to gods, or simple human obsession with order. Watching it firsthand, you realize it is all three: a meditation, a ritual, and a foundation for everything that follows. Night settles in, the river calm and dark, carrying reflections of lanterns and fading daylight. You lie back on the sand, lulled by the steady rhythm of styluses and the soft murmurs of traders, letting the gentle persistence of human diligence guide you toward sleep.
Morning drifts quietly over the river delta, the pale light spilling across reeds and mud, soft enough to make you wonder if the world is still dreaming. You wake to the gentle clatter of clay tablets being moved, the shuffle of sandals on sand, and the occasional low bray of a donkey. The caravan is stirring, preparing for another leg of the journey deeper into Sumer's web of trade and settlements. You follow a young scribe balancing a stack of fresh tablets. Each one is heavier than it looks, not just from clay, but from the responsibility encoded within it. A miscount, a misimpression, or a crack could ripple through markets, temples, and households far from here. You notice his careful hand movements, the deliberate press of each wedge, the tiny corrections that prevent future errors. Quirky tidbit: some scribes pressed whimsical images into the edges of the tablets, tiny animals or playful stick figures, perhaps to ease monotony or amuse future readers. Mainstream historical fact: these tablets represent some of the earliest forms of cuneiform writing, the backbone of record-keeping for millennia. As the caravan moves east, the heat of the day begins to settle in. Dust rises in lazy clouds around the donkeys' hooves. Merchants mutter softly, coordinating their loads and ensuring tablets are stacked in proper order. You begin to notice the rhythm of the operation. Each person, each animal, each stylus tap contributes to a larger harmony, a subtle symphony of order amidst the vast, chaotic landscape. Historians still debate whether Sumerian records were primarily utilitarian, religious, or both. Observing this system, you realize it's a combination: practical, devotional, and undeniably human. Each tablet preserves a moment: the distribution of barley, the allocation of beer, even the measurement of labor and wages. By midday, the caravan reaches a narrow settlement nestled along the river. Boats bob gently against the banks, ready to transport goods further downstream. Merchants unload carefully, scribes check tablets against cargo, and children practice making wedge marks in soft mud. You watch an apprentice giggle as his wedge slips slightly. The scribe overseeing him smiles, reminding you that even in precision, there's room for play. Outside, merchants negotiate gently, balancing transactions and tablets. One older trader tells a story about a lost tablet that found its way back after a flood, a tale that blurs myth and memory. The clay preserves not just numbers, but the stories behind them. As the sun begins to lower, the river reflects gold and pink hues, rippling gently with the current. Scribes finalize their copies, traders rest, and children play near the water's edge. The tapping of styluses, the soft murmur of voices, and the gentle lapping of water create a rhythm that is calming and hypnotic. You sit under a date palm, letting the gentle hum of human diligence, river, and clay wash over you. Historians may argue endlessly about intent and innovation, but the lesson is simple. Civilizations endure through careful attention, subtle rituals, and the persistent act of counting and recording. Night falls, the river dark and still, lanterns flickering along the banks. You lie back, letting the rhythm of styluses, whispers, and distant laughter lull you toward sleep, reflecting on the enduring beauty of human effort etched in clay.
The morning unfolds in a soft haze of light, and you awaken to the faint scent of river mud and sun-warmed clay.
Traders are already on the move, the rhythmic bray of donkeys blending with the shuffle of sandals on packed earth. Today, the caravan is heading toward a larger settlement where multiple trade routes converge, and the significance of record-keeping becomes even clearer. You follow the scribe who has been your guide, watching him carefully carry his stack of tablets. Each wedge he presses is deliberate, precise, and imbued with importance. A single misimpression could ripple through the distribution of goods, affecting families, temples, and markets alike. The quiet weight of responsibility is tangible, almost meditative, as you walk beside him. Quirky tidbit, some Sumerian tablets include small symbols meant to humorously indicate hurry or beware, showing that even bureaucracy had its little jokes. Mainstream historical fact, these tablets form the earliest cuneiform records, establishing the framework for accounting, law, and administration in ancient Mesopotamia. As the caravan moves, you notice the landscape changing. Narrow, reed-lined canals, sun-baked earth, and distant ziggurats looming on the horizon. Merchants coordinate their loads with quiet gestures. Children dart between crates, practicing wedge marks in soft mud. The rhythm of movement, counting, and stylus tapping is hypnotic, almost soothing, lulling you into a reflective calm. Historians still argue whether these records were primarily pragmatic or if they also carried symbolic weight. Observing the scribes, you understand it's both, a method for survival and a subtle storytelling device. Each tablet preserves the distribution of goods, the tally of labor, and the nuance of human care embedded in careful notation. At midday, you arrive at the settlement's bustling market. Boats line the riverbank, merchants negotiate, and scribes compare tablets with cargo. One apprentice accidentally stamps a small animal on the edge of a tablet and giggles. The senior scribe smiles, noting that humor and diligence often coexist. You realize that these small gestures carry human warmth across centuries. By afternoon, the market hums with organized activity. Barley is counted, jars are weighed, and every tablet is meticulously checked. Traders rest briefly, sharing meals of flatbread and lentils, while scribes finalize copies to ensure no transaction is lost. You watch as the repetition becomes ritual, tablet pressed, numbers aligned, responsibility shared. As evening settles, lanterns illuminate the river, casting reflections of glowing rectangles on the water. Children play, styluses tap, and the soft murmur of traders echoes. The rhythm is steady and hypnotic, the heartbeat of civilization preserved in clay. You find a quiet spot by the water, letting the soft hum of human diligence, distant laughter, and river lapping carry you towards sleep. The journey of record-keeping, begun so long ago, feels eternal, a meditation on patience, persistence, and the gentle insistence of counting and remembering. The sun sets fully, the river dark and still. You close your eyes, drifting in the knowledge that these small, deliberate acts, tablets pressed, numbers tallied, created the foundations of civilization, and in doing so, left a calm, enduring legacy to which you can surrender.
The night deepens, and the world grows quiet. The soft ripple of the river blending with the faint, steady tapping of styluses from distant warehouses. You lie on the sand, letting the cool breeze carry away the dust of the day, the clatter of clay, the weight of numbers now fading into a gentle hum. The Sumerians' careful record-keeping, their small wedges pressed into tablets, feels like a lullaby from the distant past. Quiet, deliberate, and reassuring. You imagine the clay drying under the sun, hardening into memory, preserving not only goods and transactions, but also the rhythm of life itself. The markets, the children, the apprentices making mistakes and correcting them, the merchants laughing quietly at lost or miscounted jars, it all blends into a soft, continuous motion. Each wedge pressed into clay is like a heartbeat, marking the persistence of civilization. The night air is cool against your skin, carrying the faint scents of barley, date palms, and river mud. Lanterns flicker along the riverbank, their reflections quivering in the water, and the distant laughter of children drifts softly, harmonizing with the gentle hum of the current. You breathe slowly, feeling the world steady, organized in subtle rhythms that reach across time and space. Even as you drift toward sleep, you sense the quiet importance of these early scribes, the way they pressed their diligence and care into clay. Civilization wasn't built solely on grand monuments or wars. It began with small, deliberate acts, counting barley, tallying jars, and leaving a record for someone else to follow. The calm persistence of these acts is comforting, almost meditative, a whisper across millennia that life, in its smallest details, endures. So you close your eyes completely, letting the rhythm of numbers, clay, river, and human care lull you fully into rest, a gentle sleep, cradled by the echoes of a civilization learning to remember itself. End of script. Sweet dreams.